Welcome to the Bitwarden Enterprise demo. Today we're going to be walking through all of the Bitwarden product features. We're going to start with an overview from the user-facing side of end-user features and how to interact with Bitwarden. And then the second half of the demo will be transitioning to the administrative features to discuss how to control those behaviors, integrate SSO, set up SCIM provisioning, things like that. So to start off with, what we're looking at here is the Bitwarden Web Vault. This is just one of the clients available to interact with the data that you have access to in Bitwarden. We have desktop clients for Windows, Mac, and Linux, browser extensions for all of the major browsers, mobile apps for Android and iOS, including the Apple Watch, and a suite of command line tools and APIs, both for programmatic access to Vault data, but also for automating common administrative tasks. Here at the bottom, it lists the Web Vault. That brings us back over here to this tab. And one important thing to mention when it comes to Bitwarden clients is that we have feature parity across them. So as we're going through the demo today, clicking around a variety of different Bitwarden clients, anything that we can do in any one of these clients, we can do in any of the others. Let's take a look at the structure of a Bitwarden account. I'm logged in here on the demo account on my work email address. And out of the box, by default, I will get an individual vault. This individual vault is where I store work-related passwords that are not currently being shared with any of my colleagues. And then I'm a member of an organization. The organization is the cryptographic entity that owns all shared vault data. So you don't have to move things around when people come and go. Everything within the organization is owned by the organization itself. The organization is then divided into a number of different collections. Collections are basically shared folders, and a user with the appropriate level of administrative privilege decides which of those shared folders exist in the organization and who has access to what data in those folders. We'll take a look at the full role-based access control a little later in the demo. So let's pop open one of these vault items, both here in the Web Vault and over here in the browser extension. The most important thing about this screen is that in Bitwarden, all vault data is encrypted locally on your client device before it is synced back to the Bitwarden server. So all of this data was encrypted on my device before it is sent off to Bitwarden for safekeeping. In addition to that, we use transparent data encryption on the database level, as well as column level encryption to make sure the data is not only encrypted by a key derived from your master password, but is then re-encrypted twice over on the server side to ensure that all data is stored safely in the Bitwarden infrastructure. We're storing things you would expect to store in a password manager, like a username and password. Next up, we've got this function here. So this is the Bitwarden Authenticator. This is not related to any two-factor that you may need to log into your Bitwarden account. We'll look at those options and policies in the administrative section, but this is for storing and generating TOTP codes for third-party resources. The classic example of this is a marketing team. They're using Bitwarden to share passwords for social media accounts. They can also use Bitwarden as the Authenticator app for completing a multi-factor challenge to log into that social media account. We can set up a variety of match detection options. So when the Bitwarden client is going to prompt the user to fill in a password, getting as granular as a regular expression for the URL that you define here so that it shows up as being relevant to autofill in exactly the right circumstances. We can also store any number of custom fields alongside a Bitwarden Vault item. So I've got some API-like information here as hidden type custom fields. And then I've got this custom field here, which is actually used in autofill. AWS is an example of a website that requires more than just a username and password to get logged in. So I'm going to configure my Bitwarden account to memorize this account ID field for me. Over here in the context menu that's automatically added by the Bitwarden browser extension, I have this option for copy custom field name. That's going to take the HTML identifier of that login field and put it in my clipboard so that I can have that custom field set up for autofill. Back over here on the AWS page, I do have autofill on page load disabled in my demo account, so I can show off all of the other options, but it is possible to enable autofill on page load if you choose. The other autofill options, you'll notice up here in the Bitwarden browser extension, there's a little 1. That's because I have access in my Bitwarden account to one item that the match detection says is relevant to the page that I'm on. If I prefer right-clicking to left-clicking, back in the context menu, I get that same list, or the keyboard shortcut Control-Shift-L, and it fills in all 3 fields for me. Further down here in the Vault item, we've got some basic audit information. We'll take a look at the more advanced audit logs that are available to administrators a little later in the demo, but we've got timestamps for updated and created date, as well as when this password field specifically was last updated. This can be very useful in command line automation, for example, if you need to rotate service account passwords. With the Bitwarden command line, you can pull down a list of all Vault items whose password updated field is beyond a certain expiration date, generate new passwords in Bitwarden, and then even in the same script actually reset that password if you have an integration on the command line, or by using the Vault Management API, have a REST implementation to reset that password. Further audit information that we have stored alongside each Vault item is this password history field. So this stores the last 5 passwords or these secret type or hidden type custom fields that were stored in this Vault item. This last option here, master password reprompt, I have enabled on this Vault item. It's just an extra layer of security you can enable on a per Vault item basis that will ask the user to confirm their Bitwarden master password before they can interact with that Vault data. In addition to these text-based fields, Bitwarden can also encrypt and then upload file attachments up to 500 megabytes per file. And if you are going with a Bitwarden cloud deployment, by default, the organization itself starts with a 1 gigabyte quota of disk space for attachments alongside shared Vault items, and each individual end user gets an additional 1 gigabyte of storage for the items in their individual Vault. I did mention the Bitwarden cloud deployment there. Bitwarden is, of course, also available as an on-prem deployment model. There's feature parity across cloud and on-prem. So anything that we're looking at here in the demo in my cloud environment, we can also do on a self-hosted Bitwarden instance if that's your preferred deployment model. Bitwarden Send is an additional optional feature for one-to-one and ephemeral sharing. Once again, you can upload file attachments or any arbitrary text. If you upload a file, that will count towards the individual user quota. And then all sends are ephemeral. So as you are creating a send, or when you go back to edit a send, you can change these ephemerality options. The send has a deletion date associated with it. That is the time when the encrypted data is deleted out of the Vault. And then the expiration date and maximum access count control the link where the recipient can access and decrypt that information. Once you create a send, you're given a send link that you can then provide to the recipient. When they load that link, a version of the Web Vault code will access and decrypt that information and show it to them in their browser. Through the expiration date, we can make this link stop working after a certain period of time, and through the maximum access count, we can, for example, create a self-destructing send link by specifying a maximum access count of 1. I didn't password protect this example send, but I could have specified a password, so I had to type one in before it would access and decrypt that information for me in my browser. I also did not hide the email address of my Bitwarden account, so the recipient is able to see who sent that information. There are 2 enterprise policies that are relevant to send. Enterprise policies are what allow you to configure the default enforced behaviors of Bitwarden clients. We'll take a look at the rest of them a little later in the demo, but relevant to send, we can disable this tick box so that all sends are traceable back to the user who created them, or disable the send functionality entirely if you don't want this ad hoc sharing function available to end users. So with that, that is all the functionality for end user facing Bitwarden client usage, with the exception of 2 features that we'll circle back to after we talk a bit more about organization design. Those 2 features that we're going to circle back to are Vault Health Reportings and Vault Health Reports and importing and exporting. So let's hop over here to the organization Vault. The Web Vault here is the primary administrative interface in addition to the command line and API endpoints. Here in the collections view, this is where I am setting up those shared folders and determining who has access to them over here. I also have a list of all of the items in all of the collections. I'm logged in as an owner level user, so I have implicit decryption level access to all collections in the organization. So some of the administrative tasks I can perform are to, for example, select which collections a vault item is available in. You can have a single canonical representation of encrypted data and then provide a differentiated level of access to different teams. For example, maybe my engineering team gets read and write access to this AWS item, and my technical support team gets read-only access. From this page, I can also take a look at the Bitwarden event logs. The event logs in Bitwarden are tracking more than 50 different interactions that users have with Bitwarden clients and Vault data. Event log data in Bitwarden is stored indefinitely. There is no retention period, and no one can modify or delete event log data. And like most of the functionality we'll be looking at here in the administrative section, there is an API endpoint for the event logs so that you can get this data out to a SCIM platform. The data that we're storing in the event logs here, you will be able to see a timestamp, which Bitwarden client was used from which IP address, who and what they did. So earlier in the demo when I was clicking around this vault item, those are all logged as events for this specific vault item. I also have an event log view over here on a per user basis, as well as the firehose view, everything that everyone is doing within the organization. Back over here on the Members tab, this is where you determine who is in the organization and how much access they have. There are two axes of access in a Bitwarden organization. The first is the member's role. This determines how much, if any, administrative privilege that user has. From none at the user level, managers are able to create, edit, and delete assigned collections. So the marketing team manager can, for example, sort the passwords that their teams have access to into different collections, as well as add and remove access to that. We then have admin and owner level roles. Both of these roles have that implicit ability to decrypt the data in all of the collections. Finally, we have the custom user role. This allows you to specify on a per user basis exactly which administrative tasks a user can perform. It's common to set up owner level users as service accounts, and then for users who would otherwise get admin or owner, set those as custom users with some, if not all, of the administrative permissions, so that the day-to-day access that administrators have don't have to include the ability to decrypt all of the collection data. In addition to the member's role, members may be added to groups. So a group is an object that contains a list of users, and then for that list of users determines which collections they have access to and how much access they have in each collection. So this can view permission means that this user or list of users will be able to have decryption level access to the data in that collection. For example, they can autofill, view passwords, copy them, but they cannot edit or delete any existing vault items, and they cannot create or share new items into that collection. Bumping that up a bit to can edit, looks pretty similar in the client. You have full decryption level access to the items in that collection, but you can now edit and delete items as well as create and share items into a collection. When anyone deletes an item in Bitwarden, it is a soft delete. It goes to a trash folder. Now, in addition to that, we have alongside read, write, and read only this accept passwords permission. So what this means is that users with this level of access no longer have those buttons to view and copy the password directly, but they can still autofill. So they can still use autofill to log into a website without in the Bitwarden clients being able to see exactly what password they are logging in with. It's important to note that this is not a decryption level barrier. This is a permission enforced by the Bitwarden clients. So if the website has that eye icon that allows the user to reveal a password typed into a field, the Bitwarden client cannot control that behavior. So it is very important to be aware of which passwords you are sharing, even with the accept passwords permission. Now, this was a lot of clicking around a web UI for managing users. Let's talk about some of the automation abilities that we have within Bitwarden. Bitwarden supports the SCIM v2 protocol, so this will handle a lot of those onboarding and offboarding tasks for you. So SCIM, based on changes in your source directory, will send out invitations to new Bitwarden users, as well as optionally revoking users from the organization when they are suspended in the source directory. And then you can add any groups from your source directory that you consider relevant to Bitwarden. SCIM will create those groups in the organization and associate members based on their membership in the source directory. In addition to that, we also support single sign-on via SAML and OIDC. This hands off the entire authentication phase of logging into a Bitwarden account to your IDP so that you can set up conditional access policies such as requiring multi-factor authentication or requiring users be on domain-joined devices or logging in from specific geographies before they're able to log into their Bitwarden account. Single sign-on also supports just-in-time provisioning. So if you have a group of people that you want to send out invites to, track and make sure that they see that invitation and that they accept it and join the organization, you can set up that group of people via SCIM provisioning. But if you want to allow just anyone in the organization who hears about Bitwarden to start using it immediately, if they are allowed on the IDP to access the Bitwarden application, they will automatically be added to the Bitwarden organization just by going through that single sign-on workflow. These are the rest of the enterprise policies that I had mentioned earlier. So this first policy is relevant only to organizations that will not be integrating single sign-on. In this policy, users are required to enroll in multi-factor within their Bitwarden account. Bitwarden's hosted multi-factor methods support a wide variety of different providers. That policy will require users to sign up at least one of these providers, but organizations that have single sign-on should enforce that, should enforce multi-factor on the IDP side, as you'll have more control over, for example, resetting a user's lost second factor on your IDP. The master password requirements policy allows administrators to specify both an overall complexity score scored by the ZXCVBN library, as well as optionally minimum length and various types of characters that users must include in their master password. The admin password reset policy allows a Bitwarden administrator to reset a user's master password. So this policy can be enabled as an opt-in, where users opt in or out to allowing their administrator to reset their password, or more commonly as an auto-enroll to make sure that everyone is covered. If they forget their password, their administrator can let them back in. The way that works is an administrator goes over here to this reset password screen and specifies a new temporary password for that user. Perhaps they would then use Bitwarden Send in order to securely communicate that password to the end user, and when that end user logs in with that temporary password, they immediately have to set a new password for themselves before they can access their vault data. The admin password reset can also be used during an offboarding flow. When an administrator resets a user's master password, it logs that user out of all of their existing Bitwarden sessions, completing a lockout. And then because that administrator now has that user's password, the administrator, or perhaps that user's manager, or most likely an automation script, can now log in as that user and either create and archive a copy of the individual vault data, or go through and individually or in bulk move data from the individual vault into, for example, an offboarding collection. In addition to the Bitwarden account on the work email address, we think it's a great idea when folks take the good password hygiene habits that they're learning at work home with them. So users can, in an enterprise organization, claim the Bitwarden Families plan for free. This includes premium access for up to 6 users and the ability to create collections on a cryptographically separate Bitwarden account, meaning that the account takeover procedure we just walked through will not apply to the user's personal account. This family's organization basically just applies a coupon code to that personal email address that will renew every year for free as long as the user remains in the enterprise organization. And if they leave the enterprise organization at any point, they keep whatever is left in their one-year family's term, at the end of which they can decide whether to go ahead and pay to keep those premium features or downgrade to a Bitwarden free account and keep all their data. The Bitwarden clients have account switching features built into them. So because the work account and the personal account are cryptographically separate, you cannot share data directly between those two accounts, but you can still easily access all of your data with these account switching features. Back over here in the policies, the next one down is the password generator policy. This allows administrators to enforce certain minimum standards on passwords that are generated in Bitwarden clients. So for example, the minimum length here is 16. As an end user, I can create a longer password, but the lowest that goes is 16 characters. And then because these character types are required, the boxes are grayed out in my client and remain turned on. Because this one is not being enforced by policy, I can add and remove special characters from my generated passwords. The single organization and require single sign-on authentication policies work together. Single organization says that the Bitwarden account on my work email address cannot create or join any other Bitwarden organizations. And once that one-to-one mapping between the account and the organization is set up, the administrator can disable logging in with just email address and master password and require users to go through the configured single sign-on integration. Member roles of the owner and admin type are exempted from this requirement to prevent IDP lockout. We'll circle back to these two policies in just a moment, and we covered disabling send for non-administrative users and making all sends traceable back on the send page. So let's go over here and talk about the vault timeout policy. This allows the administrator to require users to re-authenticate in some way on a schedule here. So you set the vault timeout policy. Users can specify how often they have to re-enter their master password to regain access to their vault data. In addition to master password-based unlocking, when vault timeout or device reboot occurs, users can configure an alphanumeric PIN or utilize their OS's underlying biometrics provider, Windows Hello, Face ID, Touch ID, Android Biometrics, etc. And that can be used to unlock the vault. These two policies change some of the out-of-the-box defaults when it comes to the user's individual vault. Users have the ability to import from a wide variety of other password manager formats, and by default, they can export in encrypted or unencrypted form from their individual vault only. One of the policies on the previous page disables this export vault function for end users, and the other policy disables the individual vault entirely. So in this organization design, there will usually be a top-level collection called users, and then through automation, a collection is created per user that they are granted access to. Because the admin and owner level users have implicit decryption level access of all collections, this provides real-time access to all data being stored in Bitwarden. Administrators also have a separate section for importing and exporting data from the organization vault, access to the same tools. When an administrator imports into the organization vault, Bitwarden will automatically create collections out of any folder-like data, and then exporting from the collections can again be done by an administrator in encrypted or unencrypted form. Last, we have the Vault Health Report feature. So Vault Health Reports are available both to administrators, where they can check all of the data in all of the collections, as well as to end users. It's the same set of reports, but when end users run these, it is checking whatever data that user has access to. The Exposed Passwords Report and the Data Breach Report both check the HIBP API for any passwords, or in the case of the Data Breach Report, from a domain breach perspective, that were exposed in known data breaches. The Reused Passwords Report is checking for the same password stored in more than one vault item. The weak passwords report is checking for passwords that are too easy to guess and need to be set to something stronger. And the unsecure websites report is checking for vault URIs with HTTP instead of HTTPS. Finally, the inactive two-step login report is checking for websites stored in the vault that support TOTP for multi-factor authentication, but for which the Bitwarden authenticator is not configured. And that brings us to the end of the enterprise demo. Thanks for watching.